south of the border, down Mexico way. That's where I fell in love when the stars above came out to play. And now as I wander...
Hello there, all you expat wannabes. I'm Johnny Mueller, and you're listening to the Expat Files, Living in Latin America, the show that tells you just what it's like to live, work, play, and or retire down here in Latin America. It's a mix of the good, the bad, the ugly, and the great, and it's all right here, so let's get started. All right, let's talk about passports, residency, and how the rules and regs are changing throughout Latin America. You know, I hate to say I told you so, but even 8 years ago when I first started this show, I kept harping on the fact that the first step in getting your Plan B underway is to apply for temporary or permanent residency in a Latin American country. And man, 8 years ago, 5 years ago, even 2 or 3 years ago, it was dead easy to do that. Sure, there was bureaucracy and a lot of manana time. You're always going to have that. But now it seems with every single month, one Latin American country or another is putting up another hurdle to residency. Whether it's requiring more paperwork or raising the minimum outside monthly income requirement for a pension, Social Security, or rental income, or trust fund income, which does qualify, you know. Or Latin governments are restricting or increasing the amount of investment you have to make in the country if you're going the investment route. For example, it used to be in many Latin countries you could open up a $25,000 or $50,000 CD in a local bank, and that would cover your income requirement for permanent residency. Some would tell you that you had to keep it in the bank for 3 to 5 years, but truth of the matter was, once you got the residency card, let's say 6 or 8 months after you applied, you were done. You had residency, and no one could take it away from you. And no one was monitoring that dough you had in a CD in a bank either. So after you had that card in your hand, you could pull that out of there, and most people would do that. Well, much of that has changed too. Oh, and here's another one for you. In the past, every Latin country would accept any kind of pension income as a requirement for permanent residency, as long as it met the monthly amount requirement. And for every Latin country, that was a different amount. Some countries it's $1,000 or $1,200 a month. Other countries it's $2,000 a month. And now, some Latin American countries will only accept certain types of pensions as the income requirement for permanent residency. In fact, about 5 years ago, I remember there were quite a few Latin countries where you only had to have $750 a month income to qualify for permanent residency. But those days are gone. Now, depending on the country, it's generally $1,200 a month or more. That's for a single person. If you're bringing the wife or the family along, the limit goes up a few $100 per person, again, depending on the country. So then let's start today with some emails from people who are concerned about the passport and residency thing. Some are already seeing it's not as easy as it once used to be. This one's from Daniel in Lake Tahoe. He says, "Dear Johnny, I certainly relate to the lady who said something about strongly objecting to some things that you say, but being unable to stop listening and liking you despite that. I, too, agree with most things you say, but once in a while, aye, as Ricky Ricardo used to say." Then Dan says, "My objections don't include any of the so-called politically incorrect items. Those things are refreshingly real and often entertaining, and I don't want to go into any details on what my objections are because I don't want to fight with you." Then he says, "I began with that digression and now it's out of the way. So, to paraphrase one of my old professors, a medievalist named Jennifer Miller, digression is one of the great joys of life." Hey, I agree. It's me, Johnny. How can I not? I do it all the time. Then he says, "Her digressions did a lot to make her lectures more interesting. Now to the chase, Johnny. I'm one document away from what I need to apply for Irish citizenship, based on my grandparents' birth in the old country. The Irish immigration website says that applications have increased in recent years. A friend is telling me now that he's thinking of doing the same thing, but through Italy. It might have something to do with the new 5G installation now in front of his otherwise beautiful Tahoe property. Anyway, I remember meeting an American when in Ireland several years ago. He'd become a European citizen through the Italy route. He lived in Spain and only was in Ireland because he was a pipe fitter and was hoping to get on to a big job there. I remember him saying, though, he'd never want to go back to the U.S., and he was a homegrown U.S. citizen. He'd fought in the Contra War in Central America, and that might have been a small part of the reason for it. So, what's the point? Let me see. What was the point? I know, Johnny, that you specialize in Central and South America. Nevertheless, do you have any thoughts about Europe? I know old Donegal is not exactly the altiplano, and the European Union certainly has its problems. But do you know of any Americans with a Plan B and a Plan C, perhaps in Europe? meaning original U.S. citizens who have also citizenship and a passport from a country south of the border and Europe too, or perhaps some other third location. Signing off now. Love the show. Daniel from Lake Tahoe. All right, Daniel, I'm always happy when I hear of someone who's working on their plan B, whether it's in Latin America, Asia, or Europe. And I know a lot of people, and there are a lot of listeners who've gotten passports from places like France, Ireland, Britain, Italy, Romania, even Slovakia, simply because one of their parents or grandparents, that's more likely, came from the old country. And they can prove it. Sometimes that involves someone digging in the archives of the registries to find birth certificates and such, and sometimes those records aren't clean, especially since World War II. Lots and lots of files disappeared or were destroyed back then. But still, the fact that a person has two passports is a very good insurance policy, no matter what country you've got that second passport from. That is, provided it's not a Middle Eastern passport, unless it's Israeli, and provided it's not from Afghanistan, Venezuela, Cuba, or North Korea. Again, once you've got a second passport, even residency in another country, that's an insurance policy. For example, if your first passport country makes it difficult to travel outside your own country, whether the excuse is terrorism, border problems, or martial law, for example, in the case of civil uprisings and such, like what's happening in Venezuela right now, then you just get out of Dodge or out of harm's way by traveling on the other passport. That's how it works. And some people have more than two passports. And you don't have to be 007 either. Now, as for focusing on the two countries Daniel was talking about, Ireland and Italy, while it's true that those two passports are great for traveling, I personally would never want to live in Italy or the European mainland for that matter. And not just because they're heavy into Big Brother there too, not to mention the cost of living is even higher than in the States. Really, all you have to do is look at the huge problems they're having with African and Muslim immigration. And then there's those extreme levels of taxation, socialism, and the fact that practically everywhere in Europe is so close to that perpetual Israeli-Arab powder keg. It's crazy to see that barely a week goes by when Muslims and Israelis are not firing rockets back and forth at each other. Then you've got the fact that Muslim countries have vowed to wipe Israel off the map. And you still want to live in Europe? At least now anyway, the rockets they're using are conventional. No collateral damage anyway in the neighboring countries. Though just give it a little more time and the nukes will fly. It's not a matter of if, but when. And for that reason alone, Europe would be one of the last places I want to have my plan B or even plan C. However, Ireland is kind of a different story because it's really far removed from the Middle East distance-wise. It's even pretty far removed socially and economically from the rest of the UK. So when the reset button is pushed and the poop really does hit the fan, everyone's betting the trigger point will be Israel. How close do you really want to be to that? And if and when nukes blow, if you're in Europe, the fallout's going to get you. Though maybe not so much Ireland and Great Britain, simply because they are in the hinterlands. But still, way too close for comfort for me. But it's not just conflicts in the Middle East. Europe is way too strategic. The US and NATO have bases all over the place and nukes. Whereas in Latin America, sure, the U.S. has a few bases scattered around, mostly in Colombia. But man, there's absolutely nothing strategic about Latin America except the Panama Canal, which is pretty much owned by the Chinese now. At least they've got the real estate at both ends of it all tied up. So, bottom line, Daniel, you have to ask yourself what a plan B is for. What's the objective? To get out of Dodge and harm's way, right? It's not to move from one potential disaster zone to another, no matter how nice the scenery. And by all accounts, if your plan B is moving to Europe, you're just jumping from one frying pan into another. So good luck with that. By the way, I'm speaking from experience here. I lived 2.5 years in England and a year in Italy. That was many years ago, but it was testy back then and much worse now. But I do go back to visit periodically, and I was there just a little over a year ago now. And what you're hearing about the illegal immigration problems there, absolutely right, there's an invasion going on. And what's saddest of all, just like some of the big cities in the States, there are hundreds of neighborhoods the cops won't even go to if you dial 911. That's not to say the cops or anyone else will show up if you dial 911 in Central or South America either. Yeah, they have 911. But certainly an ambulance will show up right away if you got a private health insurance plan. That's part of their service. But as far as just being a tourist or a visitor, if you're dialing up 111 in San Pedro Sula, Honduras, or let's say Managua, Nicaragua, well, if you're calling from a business district or a nice first world neighborhood, they'll show up. Anywhere else, maybe not, or maybe in 2 or 3 hours, or even the next day. Now, I know. Some people might be thinking, that's terrible. I'd never want to live there. You dial 911 and there's a possibility no one will show? Well, you see, as for me and most all expats, we've already decided that we're responsible for ourselves. We don't want to rely on government for anything, including the 911 service, because we know with government, any government, it's always too little too late. So your choice is to let the government give you hit and miss crap quality service, or pay out of pocket for a private service and get 100% response time. Meanwhile, your average Joe who doesn't think too deeply believes stuff like that should be handled by the government. In other words, free. Though nothing is for nothing. Except maybe this show, huh? That's why I always remind people, if you're going to have your plan B in a third world country, you have to set up your own network. Don't expect the government to help you with anything, and if they do, consider it a gift. One of my purposes in life is to have as little as possible to do with any kind of government or agency. And here in Latin America, they certainly don't want to have anything to do with you either, which is another great thing. You don't bother them, they don't bother you. Whereas up in the States and Europe, that seems to be the reason they exist. To monitor you, keep you on a short leash, and milk you like a cow every which way they can. So then, Daniel, how much did I digress in that rant? That said, Daniel, in the end, my advice is if you do have relatives in Ireland or Italy, go ahead, go for that passport. And do visit the old country and the relatives once in a while, and just hang on to that passport. It's a great insurance policy. But personally, I'd never want to live there. I want to be living in a non-strategic zone, at least 500 miles removed from any place that people call first world. That way, when the reset button does get pushed, I can watch it implode from a nice, safe distance. However, if you're living in Europe or in the US, you'll be in the epicenter of the implosion. Not good. And as for having a plan C, well, I've got one. It's my contingency if my plan B goes in the crapper. Now, of course, my plan C and D are also in Latin America, which brings me to this next email concerning Latin American country residency. Now, this one comes from an early Expat Insider seminar attendee. He's got his plan B well in motion and has moved with his wife to Latin America now. His name is Aaron, and actually, he's a very cool and brilliant guy. He's down here now, and I really wish I had more time to hang with him, but I've been traveling a lot lately, so that hasn't been possible, but we will be connecting face-to-face soon enough. One thing I can tell you for sure about my Expat Insider seminar attendees, and I've been doing these seminars now for 8 years. Every last one of them is way smarter than the average bear. And some of them, well, I'm thinking, if the rest of the world had their brain power and common sense, we wouldn't be needing plan Bs because the world would be an excellent place. And Aaron's one of those guys, an engineer and inventor that went to MIT. And I'll tell you, every engineer I know wishes he went to MIT. And the cool thing is he's humble about it too. Anyway, he says, "Hello, Johnny. Long time no talk. Having a great time, and Guatemala and the family is doing well. Just a question. In the orientation at your seminar, you stated you're not here to hold our hands and help us with every little thing when we move down here. So I have not been bothering you on purpose." Then he says, "Thanks for the car info you gave me last year. It has done me well. But aside from that, my Guatemalan lawyer told me to email you about the new FBI reports required for citizenship and residency in Guatemala. I could tell you a long story about having to turn paperwork in and how long it's taking, almost as if it was not supposed to happen. It seems like the government just keeps changing things, and by the time I turn in some paperwork, suddenly I need to get more. And then my old paperwork expires, and I have to redo that over and over. Anyway, to the point, I'll be needing an FBI report. That's the new requirement. And my lawyer said, perhaps you could advise me how to get one at the U.S. Embassy while we're down here. So, Johnny, please, some advice on how to accomplish that before my second set of papers expire again. Thanks, Johnny. Aaron." Well, Aaron, looks like you got stuck in one of those manana time endless loops. Kind of like a Möbius strip, huh? Möbius strip. I think only physicists, mathematicians, engineers, and artists get that one. But anyway, Aaron, I'm sorry you got caught in that fray. But I have to tell you, and all the dozens of emails I've gotten from people wondering about the same thing. Why suddenly has Guatemala changed its immigration policy and now requires an FBI report, or so-called FBI background check? Well, I'll tell you, there's nothing sudden about it, because I've been mentioning for years now that all this kind of stuff's been on the horizon. That eventually every Latin country was going to insist on an FBI report, instead of that much, much easier and much more convenient police or sheriff's good conduct report. You know, we're going to look back and say, those were the good old days. Even just a few months ago, You could walk right into your local sheriff's department, ask for it yourself, and get it issued in about 20 minutes. But that's all over now. And thus one really cool loophole was closed too. Because and I really didn't want to mention this on this show before, but if you had, let's say, a misdemeanor or even a felony or a drunken driving charge, it would definitely show up on your sheriff's report. And some people, when applying for residency, would send me an email saying, Johnny, I don't think I'm going to be able to get it because I had DUI or I got picked up in college for having a couple of joints. And yes, that would show up on your sheriff's report. And even if it was exonerated, no Latin immigration department will process a person for residency if his report is not absolutely squeaky clean without a single mark on it. And thus the loophole. For example, suppose you live in Chicago and had a DUI, right there on your sheriff's report. However, that didn't mean it was case closed for residency. Because you see, in situations like that, I would often advise a person to take a walk or a ride over to Indiana, another state, or any other state where you've got friends or relatives living. Then, you see, one of them could go down to their local sheriff's department and pull a report on you. Now, you're probably thinking, how is that possible? Who knows, you might never even have been in that state. But remember, we're talking about a loophole here. Suppose your sister's living in Indiana and you're not. She could go down to the sheriff's department and ask for a police report on you. The only thing the bureaucrats will ask for in that case is your full name and address. Of course, you don't live there, right? But they don't know that. But your sister does. So she puts down her address. They check the records to see if you've got any black marks. Of course you don't, because you never lived there. They print it out on their official stationery, and voila, a clean sheriff's report. Now, you might be thinking that's dishonest, right? Put it this way, it's pretty great. Because the part about you not having a criminal record in that state or jurisdiction is certainly true. And the part about living at your sister's address? Just a technicality. Well, all you have to do is walk in and sit on the couch for 10 minutes, and technically for those few minutes anyway, you were living in that living room. See what I mean? Yep, but as time goes on, those windows of opportunity are closing or are closed. So Guatemala was the straggler in that department, but now it's up to date, unfortunately. And in Aaron's case, or anyone who's already moved to a Latin country, you'll find out two things right away about FBI reports. One is they won't send the report to a foreign country. It's got to be a U.S. address. And if you're out of the country, that's not a problem, because you could always have it sent to your mother, another relative or friend. That is, if you don't mind them snooping, they might look at that report. Which begs the question, you got anything to hide? Now, if you search the internet, you'll find there are companies that will process your FBI report for you. They're private companies. They're just out to make a buck. But anytime you have to deal with the U.S. government regarding forms and submission of applications and such, it's a pain in the ass and the wording is never straight. So maybe it's not a bad idea to drop $50 and have one of these companies do it for you. So you can either do it yourself from the U.S. government FBI site, and it is a pain in the ass, or you can have a company help you with it. If you do, they'll have all the downloadable forms in PDF right on their website. You just fill that stuff out and send it to them. But the problem is, you see, the FBI will want your fingerprints done a certain standardized way, too. And if you're in the States, that's fairly easy. Well, I shouldn't say that nothing with government is easy, but at least these days, you could have your fingerprints captured and submitted electronically, but only if you're in the U.S. They've got what are called live scan locations. There are over 14,000 of these locations. They're mostly law enforcement agencies, police, sheriff's offices, and university campus security stations. However, the FBI will also accept your fingerprints in ink on a special FBI-approved fingerprint card. Now, this form is called FBI Fingerprint Form FD-258. And when you're on one of these company websites that'll do the whole thing for you for $50, you can click and get the official FBI card downloaded right from their site. So, Aaron, that's what you're going to have to do. Print out a couple of them. I suggest 3. Why? Because if the first or second fingerprint card is rejected by the FBI because of poor fingerprint quality, whatever, you're covered. So for guys like Aaron who are not in the States, what do you do then? How do you get the fingerprints on there correctly? Some people have tried it at home with an ink blotter, but forget about that. It's something that needs practice because you got to roll your fingers in a certain way. So what do? Well, take those fingerprint cards down to your local Latin American police station. Make sure it's a big central station too, because then they'll have all the equipment and the experience. Oh, and bring someone with you to translate. You'll have to speak Spanish because they probably won't know what you're talking about. Though they might if you wave the forms in front of them. And who knows, they might charge you $5 or $10. And I don't think they've got any reason to refuse to do that. And if they hesitate, show them some green, or red or blue or brown, whatever color funny money they're using in that country. though I'm positive they won't refuse. In fact, just about 4 or 5 months ago now, I acted as an interpreter for a gringo couple from New Jersey who were applying for residency in Panama, and I went down to the police station with them and watched them as they got their fingerprints rolled. All in all, pretty interesting. The cop that did it, he just said, "Hold out your hands." He grabbed the fingers and did all the work, though you do walk out with your hands kind of blue and skanky looking. My advice, don't wear white. And bring a little pack of those diaper wipies with you, because chances are, and it's almost a guarantee, there won't be any paper towels in the cop shop bathroom. That's a given. Anyway, if you want a link or two to some of those companies that'll do the whole works for you, send me an email, theexpatfiles@gmail.com, and I'll ship it off to you. Oh, and one last thing, and I can't hardly believe this is possible. Just in the last year or so, the FBI has somehow set it up so you can access your FBI background check report on the internet. And believe it or not, many Latin American countries will accept an online version of your report as long as it's digitally signed. Though for security purposes, the FBI set it up so that only you have access to the report online, and then you can download it and send it off to one of those companies. So not only does the FBI have a time limit on when you can download it, they also give you a unique list of codes. So for example, if right now you want to access your report, you go to the site, they'll give you a code, you'll find it on your chart, and then you'll respond by putting in the code that's next to it. Only then will you be able to see and download your report. Like I said, you've only got a limited amount of time to access that report, and then it's gone. Man, that's one thing government's good at, complicating your life. Well, that's why I say it's probably not a bad idea to have one of those private companies hold your hand through the process. Oh, and the FBI charges another $50 or so the whole cost, over $100. Then you've got the courier cost, UPS or FedEx, for them to send the hard copy to that address in the states you gave them. All right, moving on, but not straying too far from that line of thinking. You've probably heard or seen on the news just this last week. A Harvard foreign exchange student was recently denied entry to the U.S. after customs officers questioned him about his religion and searched his phone and laptop at the airport and found that he and his friends had written anti-American social media posts. Well, as far as I'm concerned, I hate it when they go through your stuff at the airport, but I do absolutely think it's the right thing to do. If a foreigner comes in and he's spouting anti-American rhetoric, kick his ass out. Oh, but civil rights groups will be suing the U.S. government over that one, By the way, as a gringo, next time you visit Mexico, try spouting anti-Mexican rhetoric and see how long you last. Anyway, if you're wondering how far federal and TSA agents can go in searching your phone and your laptop, etc. at the borders, even if you are a citizen, here's the facts. Customs officers are legally allowed to search travelers' personal electronics without a warrant, whether they're visitors or American. However, travelers can refuse access to their devices, but customs officers are not obliged to allow anyone into the country who won't let them probe or do a search. So for now, if you're worried about that kind of stuff, lawyers and privacy experts will recommend that travelers carry burner phones, encrypt their devices, or simply not bring electronics along with you at all. All right, here's a little tip from me. If you're going to, for example, bring a laptop and don't want to go through all the troubles and hours it would take to sort files into personal, meaning you don't want anybody to look at them, or non-critical files like reports and YouTubes and videos, music, audiobooks, all that stuff. Because you can do that, but it takes hours to partition those files, and then you can encrypt the sensitive stuff and leave the other stuff wide open for them to see. And the encrypted files, you can hide and nest them within another obvious file that says, for example, colostomy bag emptying instructions. But that does take a lot of time, effort, and it's a hassle. Probably right up there with emptying a colostomy bag. Here's a better tip. Buy one of those mini SD cards that has huge memory on it. 500 gigs or a terabyte. Cost you maybe 40 or 50 bucks. Then, the night before you go on your trip, shove it in your computer slot and completely copy all of your files. And those things are smaller than a SIM card. You shove that in your wallet, your shoe, your pocket, your baseball hat, and no one would ever be the wiser. Then just bring a cheap, tiny, maybe 10 or 11-inch screen computer with you, with just an operating system on it. Then you're back in business as soon as you get out of the airport. Oh, and by the way, if you refuse to let TSA or Customs look at your stuff, if you're a citizen or legal permanent resident, they have to let you back into the country eventually, but they can hold you at the airport for an indefinite period of time. But if you're not a citizen, border agents can refuse your entrance. Meanwhile, I have a couple of cases here of some people who were actually given a third degree while going through customs at the airport. Listen to this one. George S. says, "My cell phone was searched upon my return from the Philippines. Customs found many photos of me with my 7-year-old daughter. all very ordinary poses of father and daughter spending time together. I told them she was my daughter and offered to show them her birth certificate, which I had. They held me at the LA airport for 7 hours with no food or water. After 5 hours, 2 detectives arrived and took me into a small room for questioning. They let me go after 1 more hour. I was told that it was a routine examination, and I was picked randomly. It was one of the absolute worst experiences I've ever had. Then there's this one from another American citizen. He says, I went to South America on a trip. While I was there, I dropped my phone in some water, and it died. When I was coming back to the States, Customs told me to turn on and unlock my phone. I told them it didn't work. They didn't believe me, and I spent almost the whole day in Customs before they released me. But they didn't give me back my phone, but gave me a paper about how to claim my phone later. I never did. All right, then Henry writes this one. While in Canada, as I was getting on a plane to come back to the U.S., I was pulled aside and my phone and laptop were searched. TSA refused to give me any information about the search and told me someone would be in touch. What a lie. When I tried to contact Canadian Border Control, they told me I need to file a Freedom of Information request to find out why they searched me. Being the stickler I am, I actually filed one. It came back denied because I didn't provide enough information. All right, me, Johnny here. Here's what I'm thinking. Just a thought. Seems like Customs Enforcement and TSA should cut out the middlemen and just ask Google, Facebook, Apple, and the NSA. And finally, my favorite border control story of all time. Listen to this. From Lawrence. Last time I went through Customs, the officer took me in a small room and asked me some routine questions. I gave her my phone and warned her that her love life will be forever tainted if she looks through it. She gave me a terrible look and told me this was not a joking matter and she had a serious job to do. She left with the phone and came back 20 minutes later with another female agent. Their faces were flushed and red. As I got up to leave, I told them, if you think your eyes are deceiving you, there are Photoshop pixel analyzer programs free on the internet to check for positive verification that the pictures aren't photoshopped. Then I winked and said, when you get off tonight, you can come on over to my place and do an inspection, in the interest of science, of course, to make sure, as eyewitnesses, that my phone pictures are truly not photoshopped. Or we could do it here in the bathroom. Bring your rubber gloves if you like. I was right, you know. After that day, both of their love lives were tainted forever. So, a word of warning to you fellas out there. Expect trouble with Customs if you have photos of your Big Johnson. You've been listening to the Expat Files, living in Latin America. If you need some help with your own Plan B, we can schedule a one-on-one phone or Skype consult. Just send me an email, theexpatfiles@gmail.com. And if you want to get on the waiting list for my next week-long Expat Insider Seminar in Central America, where you're guaranteed to get a 2 to 5 year head start on your Plan B, send me an email, theexpatfiles@gmail.com. Nos vemos.